Hands up, no slowing me down. Okay, YouTube, I am back with another episode, and this is not a happy one. We are going to be talking about Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, which if you guys have not been paying attention to the news or to YouTube, which I feel like you guys have, because if you're watching me, you have definitely been in the depths of YouTube. This is a case that deals with child abuse that these both women were a part of. Just to give you guys a little synopsis on this story, if you haven't heard of it, we first got wind of this child abuse case in August 30th of 2023, so just last year. And on that day, the youngest son of Ruby Franke had fled from a property in Utah and went over to a neighbor's property and was ringing on the doorbell, asking for help, asking for actually specifically food and water.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
The neighbor was like not super sure what was going on, was kind of hesitant at very first, but then quickly was like, wait, why is there a kid at my door asking for water? So he went to go check on the kid. He opened the door, and then he noted that the boy was emaciated, which basically means that he had open wounds. He was also very malnourished and appeared super like skinny and frail, like he hadn't eaten in a couple of days, and was really, really sad. It even like brought him to tears on the 911 phone call.
Just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help.
It was at that moment that he reported that this child had ran away from his mother and his mother's friend and was seeking for help. And just to give you another quick snapshot, which you guys have probably heard in the news, these 2 women were found guilty of 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, and they're going to be serving from 1 to 15 years total for each of those counts. Now, this video is not about did they do it, did they not do it. This video is really dissecting how these 2 women got to this position and just questions that I have. So I'm gonna first just walk you through quickly who each of them are. Ruby Franke was a YouTuber, mom / family vlogger, and she had gotten her start a couple of years ago, but she had reached a point where she had gotten over 2 million subscribers, which is a huge feat. Obviously, I'm doing YouTube and it's a lot of work to get to that point. But she was running a vlogging channel that was called 8 Passengers that highlighted her husband, Kevin Franke, and their 6 children. So in no particular order, we have Shari, Chad, Julie, Abby, Russell, and Eve. And the 2 children that were found in that home were the 2 youngest, which were Russell and Eve. And then on Jodi Hildebrandt's side, she was a counselor in that area. She had also previously been a therapist, but then opened up her own practice, which was Connexions Classroom. All right, so the first person I'm gonna walk us through is who is Jodi Hildebrandt. The thing about Jodi is that she is Satan before our very eyes. Truly she is, and I mean that in the least hyperbolic way, because Jodi Hildebrandt has had multiple decades of performing this child abuse. She's been reported by family, she's been reported by people in the community, people that belong to the congregation that they're a part of, and no one has done anything. And I think the second thing that I want to point out is that there are a lot of religious undertones with this case. Now, both Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke are part of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they are, i.e. Mormon, and they live in the same community. That's how they met in the first place. But Jodi, she's been reported multiple times. When she served as a therapist, she got her license removed in 2012 because basically she had spread lies about a man in the community saying that he was a child predator when there was no evidence to support it. He is actually has actively been suing Jodi Hildebrandt because of this dent to his reputation in the community. Like, he's not been able to go to church, he's not been able to work. He's been exiled from all his friends. His wife left him. And it was really sad because as I go through talking about this case, you're going to realize that these kinds of accusations from Jodi Hildebrandt really came from nowhere. Another case with her niece, this niece has spoken out publicly now, Jessie Hildebrandt. She's talked about the fact that as a teen, she was moved into her aunt's home and she was enduring a similar kind of abuse by the hands of Jodi.
We knew that Jodi does this. We knew 14, almost 15 years ago that she's already done this to me. And people saw and people witnessed and did nothing. She made me sleep outside in the snow. She duct taped me. I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone.
What, in theory, was the justification for the duct tape?
The duct tape was, in her words, an external reminder to me that I'm a liar.
The basic philosophy of Jodi was that everybody was suffering from certain distortions, which were whether like you being lustful, being selfish, controlling, manipulating other people, addiction to different things like alcohol, sex, drugs, porn. And she basically asserted that everybody was living in a certain kind of distortion. And the only way to rid yourself of these things was by being impeccably honest, by having humility, and having a rigorous sense of personal responsibility over those things. And like I said, Jodi opened up her own private practice of counseling, which was called Connexions Classroom. So she wasn't only just perpetuating these things in her personal life with her niece, she also was perpetuating these things, these ideas probably in her teachings to other parents within that community. It's important to note too that Jodi Hildebrandt has 2 children of her own. Neither one of them have come out at all to speak about this case, and I don't blame them. Honestly, it seems like they probably want to have a private life. They want to forget what happened to them probably as children, because you can only imagine if she was doing that to her niece who stayed with her for only 1 year, what was she doing to her own children for all 18 years of them being under her care? Like, neither of her kids speak to her at all. All right, so now we're going to talk about Ruby Franke, and this is going to be through the eyes of her daughter, who is Shari Franke. Her daughter had come out with her own book called The House of My Mother. According to Shari's accounts, her mother got married at the age of 18 after knowing her dad for what? 2 weeks. Okay, she's better than Kim Kardashian combined. And she had gotten married and quickly started having children. At the time of this abuse being found out by the public, her oldest kids had gone off. Her oldest daughter, Shari Franke, who wrote the book, was off in college. The boy was kind of like living his own life. The 2 daughters, we didn't even know where they were, but the 2 youngest were the ones that were in that home, of which we later found out was Jodi Hildebrandt's home in Utah. This is what really got me kind of curious about this case, because I was like, wait, why? There's like kids over here, there's kids over there, there's kids over there, and I'm like, some of them seem to have a normal life, like the daughter was going to college. Some of them, they said that they weren't even accounted for at that time, and then others like were the ones enduring that abuse. So I was like, what is going on with this family structure? Like, you'd see like all of them being abused. According to Shari's accounts, I was kind of getting the picture that Ruby Franke didn't seem to me like she was born an abusive mother. She seemed to me like she was someone that was struggling with postpartum depression in the early stages of Shari's life. And actually, Shari said that she had kind of known her mother to constantly be depressed and sad and crying. And this kind of lined up with the fact that she had 6 children. There are instances of postpartum depression where they're so severe that the mother kills their own baby. And I feel like just from the accounts of what Shari is recollecting is that she probably was struggling with that. Shari recounted things that I thought were relatively normal. Like she didn't feel comfortable bringing her friends over because she didn't want to mix her family life and her like friendships. She also said that when she started her own YouTube channel, even though the family had already had theirs up and running, by that point they already had like over 100K subscribers. But the mom didn't want to give Shari a shout out. She said, I want you to earn it. I want you to do like your own channel and get to 100K. Once you get to 100K, I'll give you the shout out. And all that stuff sounded like kind of normal to me. Like, yeah, it was tough parenting, but it wasn't abusive. And I think that's why I want to start off with talking about Jodi first, is because I think Jodi really was the one that introduced abuse. Anyway, so the family continues growing on YouTube and they end up reaching over 2 million subscribers. It's at that point where the oldest son, Chad, is 14 years old. He's kind of going through his rebellious phase in school. he then is also kind of like messing with his siblings. So as part of one of the punishments that the parents put on the son is that he's going to be sleeping on a beanbag.
But what you guys didn't know was Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room. And he just got the bedroom back, and it's because he's shown up consistently without bullying the kids.
They had gotten to this point in their YouTube career. Obviously, they've reached over 2 million subscribers, so they have somebody who's going to help them with the editing, and part of their filming included the son talking about the fact that he was sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months, which is crazy, okay? This footage is then given to the editor, and the editor chops it up. He is like, oh, this is actually the most interesting point about this video, makes the video about this. Ruby gets the last look at the cut of the video, and she sees no issue with it, posts it up. Now, a bunch of her subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, just start unfollowing them, unsubscribing from them, and telling Ruby Franke that she is abusing her son. She's a child abuser. And anybody in the right mind would hear that number and think, that is absolutely insane. Your kid slept for almost a year on a beanbag, and you didn't think there was any issue with that? It just shows that she had gone from a place of, I wouldn't necessarily even call her abusive in the beginning, to a place where like that kind of thing is beginning to become normalized. And I do need to call out the father, Kevin Franke, as well, because he is part of that. Now, he didn't have any part to do with the abuse of those 2 children that were found in the Utah property, but he definitely, to me, subscribed to the idea of tough parenting, because you don't just get from a point of like not disciplining your kids too much to then the kid sleeping in a beanbag and you as a father are also seeing that and thinking that's okay. Like, that also seems to me like you're part of that process of thinking that this is appropriate discipline for children. It's during this time that Ruby first meets Jodi because she needs help with her son, and Jodi is well respected in the church and he serves as Chad's counselor. And then since this point, they're losing their subscribers, they're losing their money, but for some reason they're still able to sustain. The dad teaches a professor job in BYU. In that time, Jodi's becoming closer and closer to the family. She ends up moving into the home because it's not super clear what happened to her situation, but she moves into the home and she takes over the daughter Shari's room. And while she's there, like I said, Ruby and Jodi are becoming closer and closer. There's even a moment in Shari's book where she describes her mother coming out of the bedroom with her cheeks flushed, her hair disheveled in a robe, and she's adjusting it. And it's very cinematic because Ruby has just had sex with probably Miss Jodi Hildebrandt, even though they're self-proclaimed women of Christ and like they would condemn homosexuality. They just are engaging in this lesbian affair, which I'm making fun of because it's so cinematic, but I definitely believe it to be true. It's like Ruby Franke knew her name was going to be out there for this, and she was just like, once they make the Lifetime adaptation of this, I need to have the whole setup of the mistress leaving, you know, the man's room. So that's basically what she's doing, but she's in a lesbian affair with Jodi Hildebrandt. Like I said, these two keep getting closer and closer, and Jodi, because she was teaching a counseling program, she had other instructors, teachers help her with that program to teach it in the congregation. But then she starts asking for a percentage of their earnings because they were teaching her practices. And the other women were like, what? We are not going to do that, you psycho bitch. You're not taking my money. But for some reason, Ruby Franke is like, no, actually that makes more sense. And I feel like this kind of lines up because every documentary that you see on this kind of topic where there's a cult, there's always that one couple that like gets closer to them. Like there's the documentary about, there's a church and they do like their own TikTok management platform and everybody leaves. Everyone thinks, wait, these people are kind of crazy. But then there's that one couple that the documentary is about and like the girl hasn't seen her sister in forever and they get closer to them. The Twin Flames documentary, everyone's there giving their money out to these crazy people. And there's another group that's getting closer and closer to the top. It's just classic cultish behavior. So Ruby Franke, because she's already kind of like building herself up to be this abuser, she's like, yeah, I'm gonna give you more money, I'm gonna get closer to you, and we're gonna like work on this coursework together. They end up going into business together starting in like July 2021. There's like early talks of it. And then they end up on their own like podcast / YouTube channel, which is Connexions Classroom. As part of that classroom, they're teaching shame, they're teaching guilt, they're teaching like how to discipline your children. And some of those things are actually like seemingly positive, like messages of like, oh, like you shouldn't be shameful, you shouldn't be competitive with others, like you shouldn't compare yourself because everyone's valuable. But there's definitely undertones of strong discipline as part of this, and it's also a rhetoric that is being woven into the teachings of their congregation or the Church of Latter-day Saints. Now, these two women get so close to the point that basically, as part of Jodi's original teachings, where she would tell wives that they had to distance themselves from their husbands, that the husbands must have like a porn addiction, or they must be struggling with lust, and so they should separate themselves from their husbands. And this is very similar to what happens with Ruby Franke and her husband, Kevin Franke. The husband ends up having to move out of the home for 1 year, and during that time, he's working on himself, he's working on his porn addiction. But Shari describes her father, and she says that he was also being told that he was like lustful and had this addiction when he was talking to a female coworker, when he was looking at another woman for maybe a little too long.
Was that part of your guys' reason for separation after you guys ended 8 passengers?
Was that part of the reason? The reasons are because of ways that I treated my wife, and some of my own addictions that I was working through and seeking help on with pornography.
Jodi was feeding those messages to Ruby like, hey, your husband has an addiction. And the husband too, like, buying into it. He's like, yeah, I must have an addiction. We can also see him the day that the child abuse case comes to light. When he goes to pick up his kids, there's police body cam footage, and he's saying like, oh yeah, I haven't talked to them in a year, or I haven't seen them in a year. I just send money over. I talk to Ruby once in a while. And when I first saw this, it didn't make sense to me, but after reading the book, I was like, oh shoot, yeah, okay, I understand now. It didn't make sense to me because the father seemed so loving to them. And what also I found interesting about his response was honestly, like, again, before I even read the book, I was like, he didn't seem that surprised to me. Like, I was like, I wonder if he has anything to do with it. He seemed, of course, shocked at the extent of it, but I was like, he didn't seem super surprised to me. What's going on here?
That he was severely emaciated, that he had...
What is emaciated?
Skinny, scrawny, malnutrition, not enough food, not enough water to sustain life. So he had, he had duct tape on his extremities, on his hands, on his ankles, and those were covering rope burns that were used to tie him down. Take a second and think about what I just said. That's the condition of your son. Given that information, your son was taken to the hospital. A warrant has been applied.
The dad was present when that beanbag was that boy's bed for 7 months. I don't think that the father is completely against this level of discipline, but I also am not saying that he would abuse his children. I don't think he would go to that extent, but I feel like he's someone that believes in strong discipline, and you can see that kind of being reflected. Even when he finds out the kids are in that state, what I find surprising is that he never says up until later, like, can I see my kids? Oh my God, I want to see my kids. Are they okay? He's like, he's worried about his wife, and he's saying like, my wife's a good person. I know she's not like this. Like, I was like, wouldn't you want to see your kids? If you were finding out that your partner was abusing your kids and you like had no clue that that was even within the realm of possibility, wouldn't you want to see your kids immediately? So like I said in the beginning, originally they found the 2 kids in that home. And part of my question was like, wait, what happened to the other kids? Where were they? Like I said, the other 2 were kind of already off in their adult life. The other 2 kids, it had been reported by neighbors often that Jodi and Ruby Franke would leave the kids in the home alone by themselves for multiple days. And it seemed like they would constantly be taking the 2 youngest ones to Hildebrandt's home, which was about a couple hours away from Ruby Franke's home. Now, the last part of this is a couple of questions that I have just in general. I find Jodi Hildebrandt's history of abuse to be very interesting because it seems as though it's something that has been reported by various different parties. And Jodi is someone who was still held up very highly by the Church of Latter-day Saints, specifically in their Utah congregation. So it made me feel like there is other people there that are probably intricately involved in Jodi. I'm not saying that there are other people who are abusive, but there's other people that definitely know about her history, and either because they want to protect her, because they're participating in it, or because they're just so unfazed by it that they don't want to say anything, do anything, talk out about it. The other interesting thing to me is that how close the community seems there. The father, Kevin Franke, works at BYU as a professor. The daughter ended up going to BYU. Apparently in the case where Jodi had spilled information about one of her clients, she had mentioned that information to people in the church and people at BYU, it said, and that's where she eventually lost her psychologist license. Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were teaching other families similar philosophies. They obviously had group sessions, they had one-on-one sessions, but I get curious about what is kind of generally going on in this community, because it doesn't necessarily seem like this is existing in a complete silo. It seems like there is an interconnectedness. Now, I do want to say I don't think any of the family knew the extent of the abuse, because Ruby Franke had moved the family into Jodi's home around like May-ish of 2023. So there was only a couple of months where the kids were really enduring that level of abuse. And prior to that, I feel like people were not as familiar with what was going on. I mean, you have to think about this. Even Shari, who has written this book, didn't know the extent of the abuse that was going on. She was just trying to free herself. She knew that it was a toxic household, but in her recollection was more psychological and mental rather than it being physical and her being tied up. Ruby Franke's sisters have come out and said that they didn't know, they weren't in contact with her, they reached out to her, and I think people gave them a lot of shit for that. But I honestly, after reading the book, I was like, no, I get that, I get it. It was like, it was isolation. It was like the people that could say something were asked to leave. Like the daughter was getting old enough, the husband was asked to leave somewhere. These two women, I think people want to paint it as like, oh, they're these lesbian lovers and they did this because of like them being secretly closeted. And I feel like it's not even that. It's like, it's just the combination of different elements. And I think from Jodi's side, something that is talked about in the book and that apparently she talks about often is she endured like sexual abuse when she was a little girl for multiple years. And I think for her, it's a combination of different life experiences. I really am curious of a complete investigation, an internal investigation for anybody that's serving in the Church of Latter-day Saints in the Utah congregation to think, hey, maybe we have people in this congregation that we need to kind of clean house with, that know about these kinds of allegations. Like, we should be wanting our church to be doing right by different people. So that's all we can hope for. And I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about this case. I don't think there's really much to discuss about it, but I'm curious to hear if you guys have heard any different information, new information, things that I should be considering. Like all the videos, thank you guys so much for your support and thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.